All right, everyone, welcome. Also welcome our online participants and welcome to this seminar by Dr. Mavis Ho. We are honored to have invited her to come in here and to share her research finding with us. Dr. Mavis Ho is a lecturer in translation and interpreting at the University of Edinburgh in the UK. And her research interest lies in the transcreation of marketing genres and the extended application of theories in systemic functional linguistics and translation studies. And since 2021, she has been teaching transcreation workshop for translators at University College of London. Her talk today is actually based on her book entitled Appraisal and the Transcreation of Marketing Text, Persuasion in Chinese and English. And this is the title of her talk today. Such a fascinating topic. All right, okay, so with that, I would like to pass the floor to Professor Dr. Mavis Ho and to share her research findings with us. Let's give her a warm welcome.
Thank you so much, Professor, for your introduction. Can you all hear me? Do I need to wear a mic on? So welcome all. Thank you very much for being here on a Friday afternoon, and thank you so much for the online participants because most of them are from Europe, so it's really early. Thank you all for being here to listen to me babbling on about my research. So let's go into the outline. As you can see, it's quite straightforward. So the first part will be talking about what is transcreation in light of arriving to a universal definition of transcreation. The second part will be my research framework, which is the 3 dimension of persuasion that I propose in order to look into transcreation in translation between 2 languages. And then we'll give you some example from real life, like real marketing text to show you the transcreation in action between Chinese and English. And lastly, I will give a conclusion, what is my main findings and also my future research plans before we go into the Q&A session. So before I go on to a nearly 15 minutes of monologue, I would like you to think about is this example a transcreation? So this ad, I think quite a lot of you have seen it before. It has been quite some years ago. So in the US market or all the English-speaking markets, you will see a personalized bottle like James, Chloe, Jack, Connor, Sarah. But as Chinese, I think everyone is Chinese here. We know that it doesn't work because for our names, usually if you have one Chinese character, one last name, or usually I think for Hong Kong people, mostly 2 Chinese characters for their first name. So it's very complicated to print out everyone's name, right? So we need to think about the strategy of how to present it to the Chinese market. So for non-Chinese participant or online, I just like to briefly explain what is on the bottle in Chinese. So 喵星人 means cat lovers. Meow is like the sound of meow in Chinese. Xing is planet. Ren is people. So 喵星人 is like cat lovers. And 闺蜜 is like BFF, best friend forever, usually for girls only. Gao Fu Shuai is like the ideal boyfriend or husband. Gao is tall, Fu is rich, and Shuai is handsome. So for the Chinese market, Coca-Cola use this kind of internet memes or popular terms for young people. And I just want you to think about, is this transcreation, especially compared to what I'm going to tell you now, the definition of transcreation. So after you know my definition of transcreation, do you think this is transcreation? So what is transcreation? In the past 20 years, it has been a buzzword for the because there are lots of discussion around transcreation, and both academics and like language service provider, we always discuss this concept around similar concept like translation, localization, adaptation. So are they the same or are they different? I'm going to unpack from the next slide. So first of all, let's consider is transcreation translation. Yeah. From the industry perspective, they always market transcreation is something that is more than translation. Transcreation is not transcreation because transcreation is creative. I don't know if you agree with this industry definition. But from Galballo and Professor Eve Gambier and Professor Jerry Munday, they already say that transcreation is a creative act in itself. So from that, we can conclude or we can see the main point about this is that creativity is not the dividing line between transcreation and translation, because translation is creative, transcreation is also creative. Then we need to look into what is creativity. In order to dissect what is creativity, the concept, and then to arrive into a conclusion, what is transcreation, I use some marketing studies to kind of understanding what is creativity. So from this marketing study scholar, they say that creativity equals to originality plus appropriateness. So I apply it back into translation. Translation, as we all know, is the process of understanding and interpreting the source text and delivering the target text, right? So it's this like two-step process. And this process requires constant original thinking and judgment of what is appropriate, because we all know that from one source text, if you ask 10 different translators, you will have 10 different versions. But these 10 different versions, they are not like better or worse. It's just like the decision making fitting the purpose, like the scopes. So because of that, translation is creative because transcreation also equal to originality plus appropriateness. So from that, I would say that transcreation is translation. It's a special form of translation, not what we understand as prototypical translation. And the prototypical translation, this quote here is from Ira Torresi, which means that the translation or the prototypical translation is mainly connected to the word or to the transfer of concept from one language to another. And sometimes it's also referred to straightforward or traditional translation from some of the industry language service provider. Now, if we know translation is like the big umbrella and transcreation is under translation and is a special form of translation, we need to look into the comparison between localization and transcreation. Is localization transcreation? From the Localization Industry Standard Association, that's LISA, their definition of localization is the process of taking a product and making it appropriate to the target locale where it will be used and or sold. So the locale elements here, as explained by Professor Anthony Prim, include legal, ethical, technical, representational, ideological, and political elements. And we understand that as translator, we do not necessarily have like our role is not going into the legal, ethical, technical, or whatever elements that is like kind of beyond the linguistic. Like, for example, in the process of localization, other than the linguistic transfer, you will also have like some technical thing, like changing any elements of the graphics in the ad, or sometimes I think you may know some game localization studies when they translate the game from one market to another, they will change some of the graphic as well to fit better. Or changing the spokesperson, like for example, for Pepsi, a long time ago, the spokesperson in the US region is Janet Jackson. But Janet Jackson, yeah, is a global star, but it does not necessarily pull us many customer than like Jay Chou in the Asia Pacific region, right? And it's us, the translator, that would know who is the best person because we have the cultural knowledge, right? We know that Jay Chou, as the fun person of Pepsi, will make them sell more Pepsi than Janet Jackson. So we have to acknowledge that it's not the translator's responsibility to actually changing the graphic or actually actioning, oh, I'm changing from Janet Jackson to Jay Chou. But because we know the true markets, we need to be the intercultural mediator to give advice to clients that, oh, you should make this kind of changes. So our work is really beyond linguistic in the transcreation context. And in my book, I do advocate that localization equal to adaptation, because localization from cloning, microcloning, and other translation scholar means that adapting, it means adapting a text to a particular audience or local market. So localization is another transcreation practice in which source material is often comprehensively adapted. So translation scholars always use localization and adaptation interchangeably. And adaptation would mean, from Jerry Monday, would means changes made to make the text more suitable for a specific audience or for the particular purpose behind the translation. So if that is the case, adaptation is about the keywords here, making something suitable or changing elements in the source material that do not work, that's unsuitable, inappropriate in a target culture, then I would argue that transcreation is more than that. Transcreation is not about just making something suitable or appropriate, but more importantly about maximizing the appeal and impact on the target reader. And I will give you an example. But in short, I give you this formula, is that transcreation is more than localization, more than adaptation. And at least I think for us translation academics, we can use localization and adaptation interchangeably because it's supported by the previous research. So with this simple formula, I give you an example of what is localization, adaptation, and what is a further step, the transcreation. And this taken from a real ad. So Nova is a car model from Renault, I think the French brand. And when it came out, it worked in the English-speaking market. Nova is actually a Latin word, mean new or mean bright star. But when it goes to the Spanish market, it doesn't work because Nova means the car does not go, it doesn't go. So it was received very negatively in Spain. And if we do an adaptation, because it doesn't work in the target market, it's unsuitable, then the adaptation would be choosing a word in Spanish that does not have a negative connotation, does not go. And this word will communicate the general meaning of bright star and or the meaning of new in Latin, because that is in the source text, right? But transcreation would mean the translator need to understand what values appeal to the target audience the most in purchasing a car. So the metaphor of a bright star or the emphasis of a brand new car may be very appealing in the source culture or the English-speaking culture. Excuse me. But emphasis of other values, for example, the durability, the ease of use, the appearance, may be more appealing to the target audience than a bright star or something new. And a name of the same car model should be produced based on what are most valued in the target market. So I hope, like at this stage, you still agree with what I'm saying. That transcreation is more than just adapting or making something suitable. So as I said, transcreation is not about making something suitable, appropriate, or not offending, but it's more about finding the most appealing or something that creates greatest impact on the target reader. And this has been supported by many scholars that who are more advanced than me in the same field, like the marketing or advertising text, advertising translation. So now transcreation in the marketing text context, how can we see if in the text or with the image, the choice is maximizing the appeal or the impact? Then we need to look into the persuasion, because at the end of the day, the ultimate motive is for people to convince people to buy something for marketing text. So we need to understand how persuasion is created in the source text and how it is created in the target text in order to inform our translation or transcreation. So as a small conclusion, with my definition of transcreation as maximizing the appeal and impact on the target reader, personally, I do think this is a case of transcreation. At this stage, it's the end of part 1. Are you okay? Do you have any question? Or can I just move on? Yes? Oh, no one. So part 2, the 3 dimensions of persuasion. Before talking about my framework, I would like to talk about the original mother framework that I developed my own research framework. So it's from appraisal. And appraisal is a framework divided from the interpersonal meaning in systemic functional linguistics. And there are the other 2, ideational and textual meanings. So all these 3 meanings, sometimes it's called the meta function or the meta meanings in SFL. And interpersonal meaning helps linguists or translation scholar to identify attitudinal resources in text. So in layman's term is subjective elements like I love something, I hate something, I like or dislike something. So in the context of marketing transcreation, it helps to identify how persuasion is achieved in text. The appraisal framework is actually a very intricate framework that it essentially have 3 domains: engagement, attitude, and graduation. And under each domain, you have lots of subsystems. So this is already a simplified figure. And as you can see, the highlighted green and yellow parts here are the parts that I use to look into persuasion. But the appraisal framework is a very versatile framework that you can use it to analyze different kind of text. For example, if you are looking into news or generalistic text, you can use engagement, the monogloss, the only one voice, or the heterogloss. Or if you're looking into like literary text, if you want to look into the author's emotion, how the author is communicating the emotions in the text and how the translator cope with the emotion, then you can look into affect. So appraisal, attitude, and then affect, or sometimes appreciation to look into literary text. It is related to emotion. So for me, I only use attitude, and one of the subsystem appreciation under attitude and the graduation. So the 3 dimension of persuasion is developed, as I said, from attitude, appreciation, and graduation. And I term them differently in order to fit into the marketing discourse. So I term them the presence of persuasion, which concerns whether the persuasion is explicit or implicit. The inducement of persuasion, which means what is the motivation or the inducement behind the persuasion. And that I related to Aristotle, so the Greek philosopher's 3 principles of persuasion, the logos, pathos, and ethos. And then the last dimension is the force of persuasion. And it's talking about the intensity, how forceful is the persuasion. Before going into details, these 3 dimensions, I have to justify why I need to use this model. So in the traditional, in marketing study, when they talk about persuasion, they usually compare rational persuasion and emotional persuasion. Sometimes they call the information and persuasion ratio. And the main finding is that for different kind of text, the rational persuasion and the emotional persuasion, they are competing concepts. So if you use more rational or emotional persuasion, then you will use less emotional and vice versa. But personally, from my findings, I do think that this kind of divide is outdated, and rational and emotional persuasion are not competing concepts, because for my finding, just do a little bit of spoiler here, for Chinese marketing text, both rational and emotional persuasion are present, and they are not in a competing relationship. Like when we look into an ad like about a bag or about some garments, the Chinese marketing tech, what I can find is they use both rational and emotional persuasion. And most studies focus on the inducement of persuasion, again, if the ad or if the marketing text is rational or emotional. But this study, they don't really look into other dimension of persuasion, like the explicitness, how explicit it is, or is really implying the persuasion. And again, the forcefulness. No one has looked into the forcefulness, like, oh, is the English one more forceful or the Chinese one more forceful, and why? Like the Chinese one has to be more forceful than English. Before I go on to part 3, do you have any questions? So now let's look into some real life examples. So the case I'm looking into is some 240 parallel articles in English and Chinese from 3 brands. And that's an example from Louis Vuitton. So as you can see the pictures, the images are the same, because initially for my project, I also want to look into if they use different image, why they use different image, and is that like, how does it contribute to the whole persuasion ensemble? But because the image are the same, so I only look into the text. So as I said, I look into 240 parallel articles. So in total, the English words amounts to 17,268 words. And for Chinese, I segmented manually, because for the methodology, I did try to use the Beijing University segmenter and also the Stanford segmenter. But when I use them, the result is that sometimes they segmented it like wrongly. If you are native Chinese speaker and you look into how they segment it, first of all, the Beijing University one and the Stanford one, they don't segment it in the same way. And also in both segmented result, I can see that some of the words, they don't segment it in a way that I want to use the data, like how I want to use the data. So I decided to segment it manually, and it's quite time consuming. So the 3 brands I look into is Chanel, Dior, and Louis Vuitton, because they are the 3 top selling brands for luxury products. So now let's look into the first dimension, the presence of persuasion. So the presence of persuasion, as I said, is about whether the persuasion is explicit or implicit. And the example I give here, let's say this jacket is beautiful. Beautiful is a very positive word that you can't mistaken. Like this lexical item or this word is beautiful, so it's explicit. But if you use another way to say it, saying this jacket is bought by many customers, the message that the writer wants to communicate is this jacket is very popular, right? But if you use popular, then it's explicit. But if you kind of use bought by many customers, in this phrase, you cannot locate any positive words. So it's implicit. And there are lots of different implicit ways. So there are 8 in my study. Because of the time limit, I'm not going through the 8 types of implicit ways to communicate persuasion. I just give you a simple example here. So transcreation in Chinese. First of all, transcreation in Chinese always have more explicit epithets. So from this example here, in English, the source text is saying that all, so the models walk down the catwalk in silver leather stilettos or precious embroidered thigh boots. So as you can see here, there's only one positive word, precious, right? But if you're looking back into, I'm only going to talk about the back translation for the benefit of the online participants. So if you look into here, the back translation of Chinese, you have 4, like preciously, beautiful, elegant, resplendent attire. So that's 1 to 4. So you can see that if you translate the same message from English to Chinese, you need to be more creative and adding more positive words for the Chinese to work. And when the English tag is implicit, most of the time, the Chinese marketing tag is still explicit. So in English here, it's talking about a foundation, so make a foundation. It say that its fluid texture corrects the skin's texture without feeling heavy. So here is using a grammatical means by making a contrast before without and after without. So for those who do not really know cosmetic products, so for a foundation to have a good coverage, I think some of the girls may know here. So for a foundation to have a good coverage, usually the consistency of the foundation would be quite thick, be heavy, right? So the without here is acting as a lexical signal to signal that, oh, this foundation can have a very good coverage, correcting the skin texture, but it's not feeling heavy. Yeah, so it's highlighting the quality of the foundation. But in Chinese, you can see that they are not using this kind of grammatical means. They just strictly adding positive words like smooth, clear texture that can effectively beautify the skin. And when both Chinese and English have some implicit persuasion, comparing the level of implicitness, the English is still more implicit. That means the Chinese is still more explicit. So this example is talking about a lipstick. In English, it's like mounting onto the lips. It provides an intense color in a single application. Again, it's a contrast here. An intense color in a single application. But in Chinese, it's using a metaphor. The lipstick is like cream. So the customer can kind of visualize the texture and melting on lips, lightly appearance, then can leave intense color. So the first part, metaphor, is a more explicit kind of way to communicate persuasion because it gives a mental image or giving experience or like a texture that everyone is familiar of, the cream 奶油. So to have a little conclusion, the presence of persuasion in Chinese is always more noticeable, like than the English corpus here. So it has more explicit epithets, the addition of it, and usually changing from implicit persuasion in English to explicit persuasion in Chinese. And when they are both implicit, the level of implicitness is still lower in Chinese. So let's move on to the second dimension of persuasion, the inducement of persuasion. As the name suggests, it's talking about what induced persuasion, motivation. Using Aristotle's 3 principles of persuasion, we can understand that there are 3 types that induce a persuasion. You can use rational reasoning. I will give you some examples later. Or appeals based on emotions, which sometimes in Chinese we call 动之以情. Sometimes like lots of advertisement, we will call that we persuade the Chinese customer to buy with emotion, that is 动之以情. And then ethos is to appeal based on credibility. So I will give you some example here. So corresponding to the Aristotle's three inducement, there are composition, reaction, and valuation under the appreciation subsystem. So logos or composition is appeal based on rational reasoning, and in here it's about the composition of objects. For example, if you say the pockets on this jacket are symmetrical or the cut of this jacket is simple, then it's how to say, on the surface it look like it's factual description of the product, but actually it's nuanced in a way. And if you're talking about the composition of a product, then it's using a rational reasoning. But in terms of reaction, it's using emotion. So appeals based on emotion, like leaving an emotional impact on readers. So sometimes in English, often you can say this perfume is captivating, or this jacket, again, is beautiful. So this kind of thing is really appealing on the customer by making them think, do they decide, do they like the product, and how do they like the product? Valuation efforts is about the credibility. What does it mean by credibility? It concerns social worth. So it's the established norms in a society, what is considered credible in a society, and that can change depending on what field or society or discourse community we are talking about. So the example I give here, first one is aging. So for aging, if you're selling wine, aging is a very positive word, right? But if you are selling cosmetic, aging is not is a negative word. Or this is a very example based on some of my students. So this sequin dress is fashionable. It also depends on the society or the people you talk to, right? In the UK, if you turn on the TV during Christmas time, you will see lots of TV hosts or like the countdown party. People are wearing this kind of sequin dress, like sparkling. But at least to me, please correct me if I'm wrong, in the Chinese society, sequin dress is not for young lady. It's usually for like middle-aged women who are a bit older, who want to showcase or make them more noticeable. I don't think young girl would usually want to wear something that is sparkling. Right? So it depends on the society. If you say this sequin dress is fashionable, are you talking to the UK market or are you talking to the Chinese market? So transcreation in Chinese, in terms of inducement, there are always addition of reaction epithets. So they always use emotion to persuade. For example, in English, it's talking about the elegance. So elegance is something that people are fond of. So it's kind of like using emotion or what we call reaction. But in Chinese, it's 优雅风范, which means elegant, graceful demeanor. So you have like more reaction epithets. And in Chinese, there are also substitutions. So when in English, that's another kind of inducement. In Chinese, sometimes they just change it into reaction using emotion. For example, in English, when they talk about garments, they use chic. Chic is a word that is valuation epithets because it's talking about what is fashionable for that market, right? So if you say something is chic, if you read maybe 20 years later, like reading this English and then looking at the image, you won't find that thing chic anymore, right? But in Chinese, it changed to 亮丽优雅, so brightly beautiful and elegant, right? And this kind of reaction epithet is against the test of time. So whenever you look at it, it's kind of like a very outspoken statement, just very boldly say that, oh, this bag is beautiful and elegant. So you cannot argue with that. But if it's chic, if you put it in another market, or if you wait 20 years later, it may not be chic, right? So that's how the Chinese translator tried to communicate, like how they sell the bag. The same bag is very different, like using different kind of persuasion. So in terms of inducement, persuasion in the Chinese corpus is more emotive because the Chinese corpus has many more reaction epithets. So it's done by both addition and also substitution from either rational reasoning, composition, or valuation, like chic in English, to reaction in Chinese, like it's moving, it's captivating, it's attractive, etc. So lastly is about the force of persuasion graduation. It's a very complicated system. But in essence, this system is to measure the intensity or forcefulness of persuasion. So a very simple, very simplified version is you have a scale of intensity. So if you say something is new or something is brand new, completely new, then brand new and completely new is on a higher intensity or more forceful than new. Same as from great to perfect, or from long lasting to forever, right? So in Chinese, you can see, I don't know why, it's my finding. Every time in English there's something new, in Chinese it will become 全新, so brand new. So it's a scale higher. And looking at the statistics, if you're looking into how the English and the Chinese text describing or communicating newness, or the amount of things, the time, the quality, or the infinity of things, Chinese has many more words that's all brand new, full of, classic, forever, eternal, like 永恒 or perfect 完美, perpetual or endless 无尽的. So you have lots of this in Chinese. So we can say that the forcefulness is much higher in the Chinese corpus than the English corpus because of all these different words that using the maximally upscaled epithets, which means they are using the highest level. So it's not saying good or great, they always use perfect, right? So now let's move on to a short conclusion and my plans. What do I do after this research and publishing my book? So in short, persuasion in Chinese marketing text is more forceful, more noticeable, more forceful, and more emotive. So if you are a practitioner, translator, transcreator, you should pay attention to these different ways of persuasion when transcreating market text into Chinese. So it's not just a linguistic transfer. You need to be more creative and pay attention to what works in the Chinese marketing text. And again, all this finding is based on one premise that transcreation in marketing text is any changes that maximize the appeal and impact on the target reader. So as I show you all this example, you can see that there are different ways of persuasion in the target culture. So when you look into the source culture, you understand what kind of persuasion is in play. You don't necessarily copy the way of persuasion. You need to think about the different ways of persuasion, for example, in Chinese or in Spanish, etc. So how do we use this framework? This framework definitely is not just limited to the English and Chinese language pair. If you are a transcreator or translator, if you want to use this framework to help you to do transcreation work, you can look into parallel text in the target culture. For example, if you are specializing in food and drink translation, you can find, so you will definitely have the source tag given by the client, but before you start translating, for example, you can look into 5 different ads about food and drink in Spanish in the target culture, and then use this 3 dimension of persuasion to see that what are the ways of persuasion in the Spanish 5 different ads about food and drinks. And then you will start to see a pattern that, oh, in Spanish possibly is also more emotive, but and also maybe more wordy, because in English, as we can see in the example compared to Chinese, it's also more succinct in a way. They use fewer words, and it's like always try to deliver a punch of message rather than using very elaborate way to describe it in Chinese. So for people who work in other languages, you can definitely kind of do the same thing, but in a much smaller scale, like finding 3 or 5 real life advertisement in the target language or the target culture and see what is going on. And then it will help you to transgrade. So my future research, what I'm doing now is to come up a transcreation code of practice for the Institute of Translation and Interpreting in the UK. So it's like the biggest professional body for translators and interpreters in the UK. And between the time that I prepared this slide and now I'm delivering here, I also got an invitation to write an article for the Institute of Translation and Interpreting as well about transcreation. And I will also do session on transcreation for their members. And I'm also applying a funding at the Royal Society of Edinburgh. And if the funding is successful, I will deliver a one-day transcreation workshop with a very experienced transcreation expert. Her name is Claudia Banatello. And I will also do a transcreation symposium with Cristina Valdez, Ira Teresi, and Oliver Carrera. So they are translation or transcreation scholar in Spain and in Italy, because in Spain and Italy, they have a very booming industry about marketing transcreation. So if you look into the scholar research about transcreation, you will quite often see names that are Italian or Spanish. So so I haven't come across a Chinese scholar doing what I do. I'm not showing off here, but I just want to say, as you can see in the example, the marketing text in English and Chinese, they vary a lot. It's very different. So there are lots of room for research, and I do want to see more Chinese scholars working on this. And it's really beneficial for the industry, for the practitioner. And if funding is successful, me and my other collaborator will also work on educational video about similar concepts. So what is localization, adaptation, etc. For ITI, so that they can publish on their website and their members can look into them. And if you know anyone who is interested in this field or yourself, you want to do any collaboration with me, this is my address. So before we go to the Q&A, I just want to advertise a tiny bit my book. So this is my book. It's not forthcoming. It's out last 2024 already. So I forgot to change it. Transcreation of Marketing and Persuasion in Chinese. And I also have 2 other articles. On Perspective, I think you know, is a translation journal, and another one is in a marketing journal. Personally, I think the one in the marketing journal is easier to read because I did write it for non-translation scholars, so for marketing people. So I think it's easier to digest. And the one in Perspective, if you have any, if I don't write it in a way that is can be easily understood, please also refer back to my book because it has a longer explanation of the concept. So I also have all these other references that I use in the presentation today. If you are interested, you're very welcome to go back into any of this to read further. So that's the end of my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for the sharing. Can I just clarify with you, your book title is no longer professional, right? It's
No.
Because you still have the professional.
So in the, I still, I didn't change that. So it was published last year.
All right.
Yeah, and the my event poster have the cover of the book.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Right.
so
okay, just
sorry,
just
not to change.
Okay, the floor is open now. Can I invite questions from the floor first before I invite online participants to raise their questions? They can,
It's up to you.
yeah, they can just unmute themselves and speak, or they can write in the chat room.
Either way, I think I can see quite clearly here if they
Okay, are there any questions? It's a fascinating topic, I would say. Oh,
Thank you so much for this fascinating talk. I have two questions. One is about the definition of transcreation. So you have been talking about this in the context of marketing. I wonder if this is a universal concept, universal definition for this term, or it's just for the sake of your project. Like if I translated a poem in a creative way, is that a kind of a transcreation? So this is my first question. Second one is you compare the two corpus and you reach the conclusion that the Chinese corpus is more noticeable, forceful, and emotive. I wonder if you have explored the cultural reason for this difference. Can this be traced back to the cultural difference between Chinese and English, or it's just a linguistic phenomenon?
Thank you very much. Two very valid questions. So the very first question, when I was writing my book, I do think that the definition about transcreation, maximizing the appeal and the impact of the target reader is universal to other kind of transcreation. Like, for example, if we translate a poem, like when we translate, let's say from Chinese into English, we also need to think about just like any other translation, the purpose, right? So if in Chinese, the poem is about communicating the sadness of the poet, then the appeal and the impact would be to appeal to people who want to also feel how sad it is, the poet, the Chinese poet, and also make them have the same emotional impact that after they read the English rendition, they will feel sad, right? So if you think about it this way, then again, any changes to the poem, any interpretation, I think that the translation, it would be quite free as long as you maximize the impact and the appeal and the impact on the target reader. But because I'm not an expert in literary translation, I just kind of apply to it as transcreation in marketing text. That's why in my book, I wouldn't say transcreation. I do say that it's transcreation in marketing text because I don't want to open a can of worms. Then people would argue, oh, but not necessarily in literary text, but even in news editing. Sometimes we need to cater for the local readers. Then even in the same event, in the same source text, we need to see what is the appetite of the local news consumer, right? We need to see if we need certain information, do we need to add a little bit more or reduce something or take it from another perspective? So this kind of also transcreation, I think. All different types of text, there are the creative elements that need active involvement or active intervention of the translator. So I do think that the both line here, it applies to all types of transcreation. But because I am a scholar in marketing translation, I wouldn't say that this is universal to all. But if I can have a collaboration with an expert in literary translation, and then we look into the process of literary translation, then I will kind of re-evaluate if this applies to that practice. Yeah, so that's my answer to the first question. I would say yes, with a but, because I'm not an expert in literature. And the second question about the cultural consideration. Personally, I deliberately not consider the cultural because I am Chinese myself. Because as a Chinese, I do think there's a subjectivity that if I want to link it in the cultural aspect, then I will argue because Chinese is like this and that, right? but I do not know enough about the English side. So this transition, like from all the example I see, from how the English text is, and then transform to the Chinese text, if I try to explain the cultural reasoning behind, I feel like I'm not the best person because I will always be biased because I'm Chinese. Yeah, but I think it would be, how do you say, good for some other, maybe it's another opportunity for future research for scholar in intercultural communication to look into why. The why, because I think my research is mostly looking into what is happening and how. I didn't look into the why because I deliberate not because I think I'm Chinese, and if I try to explain it, it's not, yeah.
Yeah, but, sorry, just a follow-up question.
Yeah, follow-up question.
I think it'd be worth, digging deep into the cultural aspect when you're dealing with translation, because you cannot separate the two.
Yeah.
I would say that your finding is actually, well, it's relevant, to the cultural studies. For example, when you're saying that the Chinese translation tend to be more explicit, they tend to use more fancy, adjectives to describe that. But if you look, if you look at like menu translations, like if you look at the English menu, they tend to be more down to earth. They would tell you what you're going to eat. But if you look at the Chinese menu, they tend to add a lot more things. Sometimes they're so fancy, you wouldn't know what they are. Even though they would include the ingredients there, they would try to use some more modifiers before to make the dish more grand. So I think this is a kind of Chinese culture. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think it's in all kinds of aspects. Like when I was just waiting to get into this seminar room, that's a very lively example. There are some paintings outside, some prints outside, and I look into the Chinese and the English. In Chinese, sometimes they say 玉人 or 骏马. You can see there are some cultural background, like there's a whole story behind what is 玉人. It stay back to the whatever dynasty, right? But in the English, it will be very plain because the purpose of letting for the English audience is to know what is going on in a text in a such short object label. You cannot explain 玉人 and then 平音 and then da 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 da. So you would just say the driver. The driver of the cart.
So that's cultural difference, right?
That's the cultural difference. Or like as you say, menu, right? If we say 夫妻肺片, there is a whole story behind this dish.
Yeah.
Why the beef offals is called 夫妻肺片, but in English it would just be translated beef offals in spicy sauce, which is very functional. Yeah. So all this is cultured, but unfortunately, let's say I am not as knowledgeable into dipping into this. So my focus on this research is really presenting what is going on here, which is more objective by comparing the English and Chinese and telling you the what and the how. But the why, I don't think I'm knowledgeable enough, or I think I would be constantly biased because I'm Chinese if I try to explain. But
sorry, to follow up on it.
Yeah.
Sorry, I was interrupted. But I'm just concerned because it really seems to me, it's a very interesting presentation, very inspiring. But it's just that it seems to me the cultural dimension is inevitable. Whenever you try to talk about persuasion and the difference between Chinese and English, in particular when you're talking about, correct me if I'm wrong, because the message that I got from your presentation is that your project or your ongoing research has this very good aim of trying to get translators to know more about how persuasion works, such that in their practices they would be in a better position to produce the translation. And I think in order to achieve that purpose, it really is inevitable that you understand why it is that Chinese would prefer that kind of language. And for me, that's a cultural issue. So. So if that's the purpose that you want to achieve, and I think that's why we have all these concerns that the cultural dimension has to play a part in your research. Yes, sorry, I know.
But in order to answer the why,
Yeah.
you will need to look into also research on intercultural study or Chinese studies, right?
Yes, yes.
But again, I'm not expert in Chinese studies, so maybe this is a research for people who are expert in Chinese culture. Because for translation, my background is always on textual analysis. Yeah, but I do agree with you. Even for like English and Spanish or English to French, why in English is like this, or in French is like this, or in Spanish is like this? I think my question, my research did answer how we like what we need to do in order to achieve Chinese transcreation. But as you all point out here, I didn't explain to the translator why we need to produce it this way. But this is the limitation of my research, because again, I'm not an expert in Chinese study. So if I want to answer this, or some other researcher, they want to build up on my research, they need to look into intercultural study or Chinese study in order to explain the why. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hall, for this very specific question about the linguistic examples you cited. So I think you mentioned in Chinese, there's always this upscaling of emotive expressions. And you cited one example, which is new versus brand new.
Yeah.
I think that was on page
18.
38.
8. So much.
Oh, yes.
I was wondering whether you studied the context where these words are used. Because from my perspective, in that Chinese sentence, I think the translator opted for brand new to conform to the Chinese grammar rather than to.
I didn't.
Just,
I didn't rule out that. So in terms of new and brand new, it's not about emotion. It's just like it's more forceful on the surface. But I didn't rule out that it's a grammatical confirmation. Like when you translate as a Chinese, you need to conform sometimes. The new, sometimes in Chinese, you always have this compound words, right? If you say something is soft in English, that's just one word. Depending on the context, you can translate as 柔美或者是. So you have this kind of two like 传心 rather than saying 心 would be awkward, and we all know as Chinese. So I don't rule out that like this is a confirmation. How to say? This is a norm in Chinese that we need to write in this way. But because like however way, whether it's in translation, we say is it like this three kind of ships, right? Back in. So whether there's obligatory, so you have to change it because of grammatical or whatnot, and if you don't change it, you cannot read it, right? Obligatory, and then there's a preferential, and then there's like optional ships. So these three kind of ships. So I didn't look into whether it's obligatory or optional. What I look into is the effect after they translate this way. So it's because of 传心, the textual effect is that the Chinese is more forceful. Yeah.
But you wouldn't use just seen in this context.
It would be awkward.
Yes.
But I think I see a point. If you compare, for instance, another example, this river is long, 这条河很长. No, we always add an intensifier. No, it's not here.
Oh, right.
I'm just talking about in general,
Yeah.
Chinese example.
Yeah.
The intensifier is what people would call that this is actually grammatical. Because if you just say this is a long river, because there's no very in the original. But in Chinese, we were used to adding the before the chang. And but I can see how this one is different, despite the fact that it might still have that similarity.
I think new is transient and
yes,
new.
But that's the impact. But there is an
the other day. Like she is beautiful. 不能说她是美的。
美，okay.
Yeah.
But But it's because of this grammatical constraint. It kind of always makes Chinese more forceful, right? Because she is beautiful. In Chinese, it's 她很美. So first of all, you don't have the 是, because we will find it redundant. 她是很美的. So 她很美, 很 is very. So very beautiful compared to beautiful, just on the surface, is more forceful. Because my research is not looking into, like, again, the reason behind. Is it grammatical? Is it a cultural thing? But I'm comparing the textual effect. At the end, the persuasion when we receive it and when the English audience receive it, how is it different?
And when you compare the number of words, there's another constraint because by default, the Chinese translation will have more words.
Yes.
Right.
Yes. So usually the ratio is, if the source text is in English is in 1, the ratio is usually 1.1, 1 to 1.7, I think. It's almost double.
Yes.
Yeah.
Maybe
just simple questions. Are there any particular reason you pick like luxury brand instead of like Harvard?
Yes. So I picked luxury product marketing test is because if you look into product that's less luxury, then how to say, there's not as much persuasion needed because luxury sometimes is something that is not necessary. Most people think it's not necessary because luxury is something that you have a good life and you add it on top, right? It's not like when you sell a bottle of water that is something so essential because you buy it to quench your thirst, right? If you need to buy it to quench your thirst, you don't need much persuasion. You just say that this water can quench your thirst at the right time, something like that. Then it's more like a rational or whatnot. But luxury product is something that needs lots of persuading for people to buy because it's not necessary and also it's a high price item. Yeah, that's why I choose luxury product.
And other questions, it's not like a follow-up, because it's like you've mentioned like some of the examples like from the car industry, because it's like I studied marketing before.
Yes.
So it was like it kind of like remind me on car models, like lots of names. It does not mean anything, but it's like in Chinese when it goes to Chinese market, it means something. For example, like car brands like BMW, like BMW is Bauma, is turning out to be a precious horse. And even for some of the models, it would mean like that Tiguan, like by Nissan, it would turn out to be too rich. Something about length and distance. So it's kind of like interesting. Like
it is very interesting. So in how to say, in the past 2 years when I teach the transcreation workshop for translator at UCL, I start to use not only this kind of text that doesn't really have the image, I also use ads like Pepsi with lots of, like with a fun person and all the different multimodal thing, or ad from Audi. So if I can find it, UCL. So I was trying to let them look into what is going on in the ad in Audi. I can describe or search the image online. Oh, that's it. So in Audi ad, I use as an example for their transcreation exercise. You can see Audi A5. So if you know the Audi model, you will know what is A5, how people will buy it. Then on the poster, you can see the front or the side of Audi, and against it is a very gray and slate, very smart background. And then the slogan is something like Audi A5, the power, and then the vice versa, something like that. And then when the translator work into it, they are, first of all, in terms of text, very fixated in the vice versa. Like how do you translate vice versa in Chinese, in Spanish, in Arabic, etc. But I think the point is you need to consider the message and the whole image as one ensemble or ensemble. And then when you change it, everything needs to change. So when there's a workplace, vice versa. the goal is not to recreate a workplay. The goal is to thinking about how the text match with the image, and this combination, does it work in the Chinese market? So for example, I explained to them as a trans creator myself, I wouldn't use, for example, a gray background. It doesn't really attract to Chinese people. I will use sunset with a golden background or a city skyline. And then I look into why Chinese people like Audi. And what I found is they really like the leg room. So leg room is a key factor for Chinese people to buy luxury cars. When they buy luxury cars, they look into how much leg room they have. So I would tell my students in the workshop, if I need to recreate a poster, I wouldn't mind about the vice versa. I may use Yao Ming, the NBA basketball player, which is Chinese and so famous in China, to stand next to the car and then like with the door open. And then in Chinese, I would say something like, even he fits. Then it's something that sell to Chinese market. And even he fits in Chinese, it doesn't have vice versa or the power or whatnot. And then maybe I will also turn the angle a bit in terms of the side of the car. I will tilt it a bit so that Chinese people can see the front, because because for Chinese people, those who know Audi car and A5, they will recognize the 5 bars in the front. So as a trans creator, you don't really only consider power and performance, vice versa or whatnot. You need to consider what sells to the Chinese market. So you change the whole background to golden, you change with no spokesperson and a sleek presentation to a spokesperson and what talk to the Chinese market, really. So,
Thank you so much for the presentation. My question is, actually in marketing communication practices, very often the practitioner would like to play around, the wordings by using the code switching, mixing, this kind of linguistic skill. How do you situate, these, so-called linguistic skills in the trans creation?
As a trans creator and transcreation researcher myself, I would really think that as the example I show you about Audi, the linguistic part comes second, really, because you really need to look at the whole thing, the multimodality, what is going on in the poster or even in a TV ad, that you need to pay attention to what kind of texts are there, and also the image or the moving image and how they work together. If I only change the text, does it work with the image in Chinese? So another TV ad I have my students to do is Biscuits TV ad. Is Italian. So there's no internet. So so the Italian TV ad is about the little pressure people have during their life. For example, I don't know if you agree, because different market will agree what is, as we Chinese we call 小确幸. Like in the Italian culture, they would think kids doing snow angels, right? Or when you ride a bicycle, you deliberately ride into a puddle. Or when you go to a market, you put your hand into the bin, like this kind of thing. Or fresh smell of the laundry, like the smell of the fresh laundry. This kind of thing give pressure to you, and at the end you have a kid dunking the biscuit into the milk to eat it. And that is the things that make him happy, because the whole 1 minute ad is about the kid, like it's very puzzled, because he's looking at like his mom putting hands into the bins, or other people like riding the bicycle into the puddle, and then they smile after that. And he didn't really know why until he dunked his biscuits into the milk and ate it. And that's what make him happy. But for different markets, it doesn't work, this kind of message, right? For example, for Chinese, when we eat biscuits, we don't put it into the milk or tea, right? So you need to kind of think about not only changing the linguistic part, like translating the Italian into Chinese, but you also need to think about the culture. How do you talk to the Chinese market. So again, as a trans creator, I would recommend to change some of the scenes. Like for example, if you sell it in Hong Kong, you can't do the snow angel thing because people may not relate to why. Like you sit on the snow and then you're doing this and you are happy. Because in Hong Kong, it never snows, right? Or at the end, where the kids is dunking the biscuits in the meal, I would change it to the kids sharing the biscuits with the family. Because in China, sharing is one of the way, like sharing is kind of representing happiness. When we eat something, we share, right? And then when we share, we're happy. So I would think like passing the biscuit around, and then the kid with his family very happy, and putting the biscuit into the meal, we would be like what are you trying to sell? Something like that. And if I use my three dimension of persuasion, when I compare to Italian, they do have lots of emotion in this act, right? But is this emotion the same as the Chinese one? Or does the Chinese one, because from this Louis Vuitton or the luxury text, I find out that in Chinese, not only emotion, you also need to use some rational reasoning. So do we, other than emotion, like sharing biscuits happily, do we need to add some rational reasoning too? For example, you see the kid eating the biscuits and then it's running very fast because the biscuits has added calcium or is made with real milk or this kind of thing to sell to the Chinese parents. So you need to think about the norms, which is again supported by culture, like what is selling in the Chinese market or what is selling in the Italian market, in the Spanish market, etc. Yeah, I have once I have a French student told me that after she watched this Italian ad, the one thing that she does not agree or instantly pick up is people putting hands into the bins in the market, because she said in France, you also have fresh market, but the vendors would never let you to put your hand, it's very dirty. So that is a no-no in the ad for the French market. So you need to think about persuasion, and I think the three dimension of persuasion, this framework really kind of give a systematic framework to prompt the translator to think about persuasion in terms of intensity, in terms of the motivation, in terms of the explicitness. Does it work in that market? Because, for example, in Chinese, we also use lots of metaphors. So sometimes it's not just keep shouting, oh, what we are selling, then you sell premium stuff. Premium stuff, usually you give a metaphor, you give a very poetic like implications to sell it.
So can I put it this way? I am articulate in a practical sense.
Yeah.
Now, in a foreign firm, okay, there will be the translator, there will be a copywriter who will be responsible for the language, and the transcreation will be kind of like the creative director, which will oversee not just the language, but the whole design of that piece of, book for the client. Can I put it this way?
In the real world, I can't speak for the Chinese market because I haven't been working in China for a long time. But in the UK or in Europe, usually you have a company that is a language service provider, or they market themselves as the Transcreation company, and then they take a job from a marketing agency, and then they would kind of do the division of labor. So they would give the run through if this product, the legal aspect with their legal teams, and then they go to the translator, or what sometimes we call the multilingual copywriter, to see what they know about this product, how can they sell into another language in another market. And usually what we do, Transcreator, is they will give us the image or the moving image and then the source text of like a slogan or whatnot. And then we need to transcreate in different options, like give a few suggestions. And we need to do the back translation of our suggestion, our creative suggestions. And then we also need to give justification of each version. Like for example, if you sell to, if your target audience or your demographic is for this, then I would use this version because of what. But if you want to reach this, or if you want to sell it in a way that is more bold or more unconventional, you can use this. So it's quite a lot of work, but it pays more, of course. And usually it pays by project than the traditional per word, count.
Thank you. Maybe can I just go back to the definition of transcreation? I have a question which I find it's worth exploring. And for me, adaptation and localization, if you think about the way that we differentiate different kinds of translation in translation studies, on one end of the spectrum, you have word-for-word translation, literal translation, and then in between, you have all these semantic, communicative translation, and then at the other end of the spectrum, you have adaptation and rewriting. And when you think about it, adaptation and rewriting, they are already significant revisions of the original text. And indeed, and also the function of this kind of translation is to enhance the impact and the appeal of the translation compared to a relatively more literal kind of translation. And if I'm not talking about the context of marketing, if you think about drama, for instance, we often talk about it's an adaptation of the original, like the Glass Menagerie. So Tennessee Williams, with its setting in America in the 1920s. And several years ago in Hong Kong, we have an adaptation, which is Ballet Dongmenyuan. But the setting has changed to North Point in the 1960s. But they share this theme of familial relationships, struggles, the disillusion because of the reality, the pursuance of dreams, all these kinds of things. But for me, I feel very comfortable calling that an adaptation, which also maximizes the appeal and impact on the target reader.
Yes.
And so, to what extent do you feel that it's possible to have a very clear demarcation between transcreation and adaptation? Because for me, they can overlap.
So thank you for this interesting insight. So when I was trying to define transcreation, and when I read about adaptation, as you said, there are different scholars who argue that adaptation is transcreation because, as you say, you also, I don't know if you notice, you use adaptation and rewriting interchangeably.
Yes.
So I think it really depends on how you define adaptation. So for me as a scholar in transcreation in marketing texts, I think sometimes all research, as we say, is subjective, and it really depends on how you present it, right? So the adaptation definition I use is from Jerry Munday, and you can argue that it can be quite general. I think everyone knows who is Professor Jerry Munday, right? But when you look into research literature in like film study, in theater translation, which I also teach, sometimes they also call adaptation trans adaptation. Yes. So this is different from what I define as adaptation. Yeah. So it really depends on how you define adaptation, and also depends on how you define localization. Because when I read into the relevant literature, some translation scholars think localization is under the broad umbrella of translation, but some other think that translation is under localization. Localization have many other different steps, and translation is just one part of it. So it really depends on how you define it. And
that makes sense. Thank you.
Any other questions? If not, can I ask one more question before I take questions from online? Are you worried about people online or?
That they can listen to me. I mean the pausing the icon.
It's offline.
So does anyone online has any question?
Sure. Okay, let me see. What's just my question. The term localization, it seems to me like a buzzword, that appear only in the past decade or so. I didn't seem to know this word until like a few years ago. I'm a little bit out of touch, I don't know. I used to be more familiar with the word domestication. So is
domestication.
there any difference between localization and domestication? And is localization more to do with the, marketing or content marketing or things like that?
I'm just giving my personal view here from what I read, like during my research. I think localization is definitely a term that is specific to the marketing translation discourse. And I think scholar in this field, in marketing translation, we don't really use domestication because that may cause a confusion to is it Vermeer? Yeah, the domestication and foreignization in translation. So I think it's Vermeer. Yeah, so domestication or neither, usually neither. So when we teach student foreignization and domestication, it's kind of, sorry.
Vermeer is for scopus.
Yeah, Vermeer is scopus.
Yeah, for scopus.
Neither.
Neither, yeah, post-originated. So when we teach students, foreignization and domestication, usually it applies to quite a lot of different texts. And then I think we all know what is foreignization or domestication, and domestication usually means you try to be target oriented to kind of translate a text that, like a very good example, sorry, I don't get
Sharon.
Yeah, Sharon said about the gas menagerie. When it is adapted to the theater in Hong Kong, the setting changed, but the main message is still there about family struggle, etc. And that is a domestication. Like, I think we all agree. So I think that's this essential difference about localization and domestication. Even though I agree with you on the surface, they are very similar words. But in terms of usage, I think localization is quite specific to marketing translation. Domestication is more like the leaders, like functional translation or the domestication.
And another point, if I may, is that when you talk about the Chinese, the Chinese market, I think we're not talking about one single Chinese market. So the text you're looking at is simplified Chinese characters, right? So it's intended for mainland Chinese or what? Because if you look at the Apple's catchy slogans, very often they're so brief. Like once they have the OS slogan called "Simply Powerful." 2 words, simply powerful, and they're translated differently in Hong Kong, in Taiwan, and in mainland. So will your study, look into these aspects?
Yeah, so when I do the data collection, I did compare the different versions. So on all these 3 websites, Louis Vuitton, Dior, and Chanel, they have the Hong Kong version, they have the mainland Chinese version, and other Asia Pacific region version. And I mean, personally, I am originally from Hong Kong, but I can read like simplified or traditional Chinese, and I choose simplified Chinese version because it kind of encompasses the most Chinese people. So it will kind of make my finding more representative. You know what I mean? So if I only looking into the Hong Kong region, then my finding only applies to transcreation in Hong Kong Chinese, if you may. But in terms of like the consideration is only really for the population, because if I choose the simplified Chinese, it's kind of like the findings is representative from the whole 1.4 billion people. Yes.
But you didn't have a chance to compare, the translation.
I did compare. The funny thing is, I can't remember now. It's some time ago, but I remember like one of the 3 brands. They have a significant difference in terms of expression in Hong Kong Chinese, or and the simplified Chinese. But for the other 2 brands, it's really just using the word translating from simplified to traditional or vice versa. It doesn't have any difference in expression. They only have the difference in terms of the simplified and traditional. So it's not consistent. So I cannot compare this way.
Five more minutes for questions. No, we will end the talk. Thank you so much.